said to his disciples, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit." Please be seated. I'd like to begin by saying that I'm mindful of this occasion, that today is our senior recognition service, when we take time to appreciate the graduating members of our community, undergraduate and graduate, and commission them to go forth on the next stage of their journey. More broadly, it's a time for our entire community to mark the ending of the year, to survey the fruits born from our particular and shared labors, and to anticipate the fruits to come. Today's gospel describes God as a gardener, someone adept at pruning, cutting away the withered branches that obstruct and entangle our truest selves. A gardener who encourages a full and bountiful harvest. And we'll get back to that, I promise. But before we do, I'd like to bring up another image that we hold of God. God as the Good Shepherd. As we know, a shepherd is someone who herds, tends, and guards sheep. And the term has evolved, has broadened, to mean a person who guides, who watches over, and protects someone or something else. I would argue that in today's reading, Philip serves as a shepherd, sitting with and guiding the Ethiopian eunuch on his journey of faith, from engagement with the scriptures to baptism. I also know that this community has been a shepherd to me. You have guided, watched over, and protected me on my journey of faith. Reverend Paul with his unflinching but gentle pastoral insight. Angela with her example of lived dedication to the students of ECY and to completing the many almost invisible tasks necessary for worship. Mary Beth with her wonderful amalgam of joy and frank candor, of inspired vision and pragmatism. Soraya with her warmth and grit and humor, and with the inspiration of her children, who despite the antagonism of the governments of their homelands, have never stopped striving for a better and more just world. Stephen for his hospitality and unfailing kindness, Kyle for the vibrancy of his welcome and his proclamation of the gospel in word and in deed. And I cannot forget our seniors, who with breathtaking grace demonstrate, as they weather their individual successes and defeats, this entire community for its vulnerability and the trust that you have shared with me, for the confidence that you have lent me. All of you have never stopped striving to realize a little bit more of St. John's not yet into his already. I have known God's love through yours. I think that this is what Jesus has in mind when he writes, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. This year, together, we have borne much fruit. And yet today's gospel is about more than a harvest. Today's service is more than a recognition of accomplishments. These are things that even if they are only fully visible or recognized now, rely on past work, past efforts. No, today, the gospel is about the work that we must do now, in the present, to ensure a continued good harvest. Every branch that bears fruit, God prunes to make it bear more fruit. God removes every branch that bears no fruit. I've always been a little bit challenged by this passage. I understand the necessity of pruning a tree or a bush. I know that the act of cutting away what is dead or distorted can be renewing and even life-saving. And I also know that the pruning of a plant is so different from the pruning of things in our lives that no longer bear fruit. The cutting away and letting go of things in our lives can be hard, regardless of how gnarled they have become. God does his winnowing work through us. And so we are, in a sense, both the branches and workers in God's vineyard. Today, many of us are in a period of full bloom and also a period of pruning, especially our seniors and graduates. Your time at Yale, your particular identity as a student here, is being cut away, being pruned. You are being cut close to the vine so that you can grow new branches, form a new sense of identity, born of the old and yet new in its way. This may be a joyous time for some, an opening of new and exciting chapters, and an anxious time for others. A period of loss of the familiar, the known, or maybe a mix of the two. And yet, regardless of how you feel right now, it is important, I think, to know that God is at work in your life. That through the joys and sorrows that accompany all transitions, you are invited to abide in God, as God abides in you. When things are brightest and in fullest bloom, and also when things seem darkest and your branches seem bare, God is sustaining you. God is abiding in you. I have a professor in div school, and he would say, remember that we are all just shift workers in God's economy. I think one of the things that he meant by this is that none of us truly knows what the future holds. That we will be called numerous times in numerous ways to share our individual gifts, our individual fruits with those around us. We will be called to make difficult choices and perhaps to relinquish things that we think are important. Our branches will be pruned so that we may bear more fruit. But we shall never be cut from the vine. And that is Christ's promise to us. And let's face it, the world right now needs your gifts. So if at any point you sit and think that your pruning has cut too deeply, that you can't imagine healing, much less growing again, I hope you heed the advice of Nathaniel Rateliff. If you sit about and think about how it all has not been easy, I hope you realize that nothing good ever really is. And that right now, none of us have gone far enough to say that at least we tried. That even if you are graduating now, you haven't worked hard enough to say, well, I've done my part. You haven't run far enough. We haven't run far enough to say that our legs have failed and that things will not get better. Jesus tells us now that the harvest is plentiful, and it is, but the laborers are few. Today, all of us are called to be laborers in this harvest. Let us celebrate our accomplishments, and let us get to work.